I am not entirely sure why I'm typing these words out now after everything fell apart. The clock says it is 3 in the morning, another night where sleep refuses to come, and I thought putting it down might ease the weight. So bear with me. This will be detailed because I need to record every single event in exact order or my mind will keep racing forever. My 2 kids and I relocated to this neighborhood early last spring. After losing my wife 2 years ago, keeping up with our old mortgage on a single income became impossible. So we downsized. A modest house, a small yard, a new city, and a sudden mid-year transfer for the kids, which is always miserable for a teenager. My daughter, 16 at the time, despised the entire situation. Her old friends were 2 hours away and she made her anger clear every single day. Slam doors, brief answers, cold silence. My 6-year-old son, on the other hand, barely understood our loss and could not fathom why we left our original home. He just wanted to comfort me. He would stand in the living room holding his favorite toy and say it out of nowhere. "Everything is going to be okay, Dad." 6 years old, trying to carry his father's grief. While unloading the moving van that first afternoon, carrying a heavy crate of my wife's old books, a man walked across the grass from the house next door. Arthur. Early 60s, weathered face, quiet posture. Before we even exchanged basic introductions, he mentioned that his own wife had passed away a decade ago, almost as if he needed that shared tragedy stated up front before anything else was said. He had an unsettling presence. He stood a bit too close when speaking. He chuckled at odd moments during normal conversation, sometimes when nothing humorous had occurred. Yet he seemed gentle enough. Just a lonely older neighbor attempting to make conversation. He commented on how exciting a fresh start must be, and I instinctively glanced at my daughter, who was leaning against the porch railing with her arms crossed, glaring at the pavement. "Not everyone feels that way," I remarked softly. He followed my gaze toward her, his expression hardening for a fraction of a second before he flashed a polite smile. "She will adjust," he said gently. "Adapting to new surroundings simply takes time." She stared directly at him while he spoke, remaining completely silent, but I still remember the intense distrust written across her face. Later that evening, after the movers left and our new living room was filled with towering stacks of cardboard, I heard her upstairs talking softly on her cell phone to her old school friend. I stood in the dark hallway outside her bedroom door, debating whether to knock but ultimately chose to walk away. I assumed she needed privacy to handle her frustration over the move, just like she was processing the loss of her mother. I think about that simple choice more than almost any other decision I made back then. Not because it was inherently wrong, but because it marked the first of many times I chose distance over asking what was actually bothering her. Throughout that initial week, Arthur dropped by our front porch constantly. Fresh pastries one morning. A wooden birdhouse he built the next afternoon. Standard friendly gestures from a retired widower with endless free time and no family nearby. My daughter refused to engage with him at all. The second she heard his boots on the porch steps, she would disappear upstairs without a word. Just typical teenage rebellion, I convinced myself, standard behavior for her age. By the second week, his attention shifted almost entirely toward my young son. A vintage train set still sealed in its original box. Expensive action figures that must have cost him $50. I reasoned that lonely old men simply enjoy being overly generous with neighborhood children. Arthur began carefully timing his daily routine around ours. It seemed subtle then, but looking back, he was always lingering near the property line whenever my son was outside. Trimming bushes that did not need trimming whenever my boy played in the front yard. Finding reasons to check his mailbox the exact moment the elementary school bus pulled up, always offering a cheerful greeting to my son before anyone else could speak. I vividly recall a moment around the 12th day that I completely brushed off, a brief interaction that now loops endlessly in my mind. My son tripped and scraped his elbow on the driveway concrete, and Arthur immediately rushed over faster than any man his age should be able to move. He knelt down, examined the cut, and murmured, "That is nothing severe. You should see how I fixed up the last one." Then he paused abruptly, laughed awkwardly, and claimed he used to be a youth camp counselor decades ago. I remember noting how strange the phrasing was, but I dismissed it within seconds. I had a demanding job to manage and a house to organize. I did not have time to analyze every weird remark from a lonely neighbor. During that same week, an urgent work assignment forced me to plan an unexpected evening trip, and I had no local babysitter since we were entirely new to the area. Arthur happened to be standing outside while I was frantically trying to figure out a solution, and he immediately volunteered to watch my son for a couple of hours, mentioning he had board games and old cartoons available. I stood on the porch with my keys in hand, genuinely weighing the offer, thinking it would solve my immediate predicament. My daughter was the one who put an abrupt end to it. She walked down the staircase, having overheard the conversation from her room, and firmly stated that she would supervise her brother herself so I did not have to rely on the neighbor. I told her I appreciated the gesture but knew she had her own homework, yet she insisted she preferred staying home. I accepted her offer without argument. A part of me was relieved not to make the call. I never once stopped to ask her why she was so adamantly opposed to him. Roughly 3 weeks after we moved in, I was gathering the mail when David, the neighbor who lived across the street, blankly into space as if his thoughts were miles away. When I asked him what he was thinking about, he would just shrug and offer no answer, mimicking his sister's distant demeanor. Just a temporary phase, I assumed. Young kids experience mood swings too, even if they lack the vocabulary to explain them. My daughter became increasingly quiet during that stretch as well, though her silence was distinct from her usual teenage moodiness. It was an intense, watchful quiet. On several occasions, I found her standing at the kitchen window, staring toward Arthur's house for long stretches of time, as though she were monitoring something the rest of us had dismissed. When I asked if she was feeling all right, she simply said she was fine and retreated to her bedroom. Just ongoing adjustment issues, I reasoned. That summer, I always had a convenient excuse ready, some logical reason to avoid confronting how little I actually understood about what was happening right under my roof. Looking back at those weeks now, the warning signs form a clear path. At the time, however, it just felt like background noise. Minor insignificant details. Then came a Thursday afternoon when she failed to return home from school. I did not panic immediately. I assumed she might have gone out with new classmates, finally beginning to build a life here. By 5 o'clock, I tried calling her phone repeatedly, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. By 6:30, I contacted the parents of 2 classmates she had briefly mentioned, but neither girl had seen her since the final bell. By 7, I called the high school office. By 7:30, I called the police department. I will not recount every agonizing hour of that night here. Anyone who has ever had to file a missing person report understands the horror, and to those who have not, I sincerely hope you never experience it. The officer who took my initial statement was calm and methodical, asking standard questions with a routine efficiency that somehow made the nightmare feel worse, because it proved this was a script he had run many times before, and my child was now just another open file. He assured me they would check her usual routes, contact her acquaintances, review cell phone data, and send a patrol unit to search the surrounding area. He gently advised me that the most helpful thing I could do was remain by the landline in case she returned or someone called with information. Sitting still was impossible. I recognize now that leaving might have been a mistake, or at least not what the investigators wanted me to do, but I could not sit at the kitchen table doing nothing while there was still enough daylight outside to search. So once the officers finished taking down my information, I got into my truck and began driving along her usual walking path from the high school, moving at a crawl. That route leads directly down our street, past our driveway, past his property. His vehicle was missing from the driveway. The entire house appeared strange and abandoned in the twilight. No interior lights were on. One of the front window blinds was completely gone, leaving an exposed pane of glass. The front door was unlatched and resting open an inch, as if it had been pulled shut in a hurry without catching the lock. I dialed the police dispatcher immediately from the driveway, standing on his front lawn with the phone pressed to my ear, describing the scene. She instructed me to stay outside and wait for an officer to arrive. I ignored the instruction. A part of my mind already understood the truth, standing there on that dark porch, and a part of me needed to see it with my own eyes before anyone else could frame it for me. The interior was largely stripped. Furniture had been removed from several rooms while remaining untouched in others, as though he had packed only his essentials and abandoned the rest without hesitation. There was a single closed door at the far end of the central hallway, and the moment I turned the handle, I realized this room differed completely from the rest of the dwelling. Impeccably clean, carefully arranged, maintained with precision in a house that had otherwise been cleared out and left behind. The entire wall space was covered from floor to ceiling with photographs of my daughter. Not recent snapshots from the past few days, but images spanning back to the very week we moved in. Photographs of her walking toward the school bus. Images of her sitting on the back patio reading a book. Angles taken through our own kitchen window, showing her seated at the table, completely unaware of the lens focused on her because she never knew anyone was watching. On the wooden desk directly beneath the wall of photos lay a single piece of folded paper with my name written across the front in neat, precise handwriting. I feel compelled to write down his exact words here because they haunt my thoughts constantly. The note read, "I hope you can accept that I never intended any harm toward your son. Young boys simply remind me of a time in my own life that I was never allowed to keep. I apologize if my presence caused you undue anxiety. You are a dedicated father. Far better than most men I have observed over the years. I saw how hard you struggled to support 2 children entirely on your own. I have cared for boys in similar situations in the past. They required my guidance far more than anyone ever acknowledged. People always find reasons to suspect a man whose only goal is to provide help. I recognized which of your children truly needed my intervention from the moment the moving truck arrived, before we had even been introduced. Certain truths are obvious to a man instantly. A single parent has only so much energy to give. All of yours was directed toward your son. I observed her closely. Long enough. Carefully enough. She never once looked at ease in your presence, a fact you completely overlooked, but I did not. You no longer need to worry about her well-being. I will take responsibility for her now, in the way you clearly lacked the time to manage. She will come to understand why I waited as long as I did. Consider it one less burden on your shoulders." Standing in that empty room, the full reality hit me all at once. Every gift he had offered my son was genuine in his own twisted perception. He believed every single word he had written on that page. He truly believed those foster children had needed his intervention. He believed he was performing an act of charity. I do not know what truly happened to those boys, not with the certainty required to state it as absolute fact, but I know enough now to realize that whatever those children felt when they grew quiet and withdrawn in his home was never gratitude, regardless of what he had convinced himself to believe. My daughter's distrust of him was justified from our very first day here. I repeatedly dismissed her reactions as teenage moodiness, as resentment over an unwanted relocation. She was the only person in our house who saw his true nature clearly from the beginning, and I missed months of opportunities to simply sit down and ask her what she was noticing. I am not recording this story with any expectation that it will resolve the situation. The investigators have possessed that handwritten note and every single photograph for weeks now, and professionals far more capable than I am are actively tracking the case. I am writing this simply because I have no other outlet during these endless nights. The house is entirely silent, my son is sleeping down the hall, and I am sitting in the dark once again, agonizing over how a person can completely convince himself that stealing your child is an act of mercy. David gave me a clear warning and I still lowered my guard. My daughter warned me as well, in her own way, multiple times, and I heard her words without ever actually listening to what she was trying to tell me. Being awkward and being harmless are two entirely different things. I understand that reality now. I would give everything I own to have understood it back then.